Welcome back to 9/11 TruthCraft. This is episode 6, and we're going to continue our discussion about World Trade Center 3. 9/11 TruthCraft is a video series for people like me who want to know what really happened on 9/11. In episode 5, we discovered that the Marriott Hotel, also known as World Trade Center 3, was destroyed in 2 parts. We also learned that most of the World Trade Center 4 was flattened at the same time as the first big chunk was taken out of World Trade Center 3. Only the north wing of World Trade Center 4 survived. The rest of the building was flattened into a rubble pile that barely rose above street level. Additionally, we can see from photographs that the north wing of WTC 4 was not flattened when WTC 1 went down. This indicates a certain boundary of the area of effect of the destruction. We'll talk more about this later on in this episode. The last episode also showed how, at the end of the day on 9/11, what was left of the Marriott Hotel was a tiny corner, perhaps only 3 stories high. This was supposedly caused by debris falling from World Trade Center 2 and then again World Trade Center 1 to finish it off. Except that tiny corner. There's so many important things to take away from this photograph. A close forensic evaluation of any photograph takes time, so I hope you'll stick with me while I go through this one in detail. How many things can we learn about this image? First of all, we know approximately when the image was taken and approximately where. Since World Trade Center 7 is still standing in this photograph, we know that it was taken on 9/11/2001 before 5:30 p.m., but after 10:28 p.m. because World Trade Center 1 is no longer there. From the lighting, I'd place the timing as within an hour or 2 after noon. We also know where this picture was taken. It was taken to the west of the World Trade Center complex, looking north. We know this because of the placement of the Verizon building, World Trade Center 7, and World Trade Center 6. In the last episode, I incorrectly labeled this building as World Trade Center 5. My bad. The short 3-story remnant of the Marriott Hotel tells us something incredibly interesting. On the day of 9/11, before World Trade Center 7 went down, the rubble pile on the west side of the World Trade Center complex was not very tall. It certainly wasn't taller than 3 stories high. This photograph wasn't taken weeks or even days later, when rescue and recovery workers might have had time to remove some of the debris. No, this image was taken on the day of 9/11, soon after the Twin Towers went down. If 2 110-story steel-framed buildings would have collapsed, the pile would have been taller. Let's do a thought experiment and see what we can learn from it. Just as a background, I want to remind you that the Twin Towers were constructed of a gigantic amount of steel in 2 sets of columns, 243 around the exterior, 48 making up the core columns and elevator shafts, thousands of horizontal crossbeams in both dimensions on each floor, supporting a 4-inch deep steel pan into which concrete was poured, making the floors. Okay? Now here's the thought experiment. Ignore the steel. Yes, ignore the steel and just think of the concrete. Imagine what you'd end up with if 110 individual 4-inch concrete slabs fell down onto one another. You'd end up with a 440-inch tall pile of concrete. There would be some crumbling and spillage in real life, which would reduce this height somewhat, but let's just stick to the idealized case for the moment. 440 inches is more than 36 feet tall. So if the concrete floors had collapsed down onto one another, they'd make a pile of concrete that was about as tall as the little corner of World Trade Center 3 that was left over after both WTC 1 and WTC 2 went down. We didn't see anything like this. We know the 110 individual concrete floors of both buildings did not collapse straight down onto one another. We know the concrete did this. This is the concrete that used to make up the World Trade Center. It fell downwards and rolled out along the street, covering up the people who were on the street. As the Twin Towers were each destroyed, we saw horizontal movement of building material that is inconsistent with a collapse. This material, this dust cloud rollout, traveled quite a distance in all directions horizontally, but never made it to Rockefeller Park. Among other things, this establishes another area of effect. If you were on Chambers Street or anywhere further north, you were pretty much okay. But a lot of people actually traveled down closer to the World Trade Center site to get a look at what happened to the buildings. These people were covered by the dust cloud rollout. I have a lot more to say about these street-level victims of 9/11, but I will have to save that for another episode. What I want to explain is what I mean by area of effect damage, and start to show how this is relevant to the World Trade Center attacks. Here's some footage from another video game, StarCraft 2. The first clip depicts one of the video game characters, called a ghost, shooting out an EMP pulse. I'm sure most people are already aware of EMP pulses. This is not a new thing. I'm just pointing out what I mean by area of effect by using the StarCraft 2 example. Another, even more fanciful area of effect spell is seen in the second clip, where a High Templar rains down a psionic storm onto some of the zealots. Okay, enough examples. What I want to do using Minecraft is to start to map out the area of effects seen. First, the area of direct damage. Also, the area covered by the horizontal projections of material in the first few moments after the fall of each of the Twin Towers. Finally, I want to map the area of effect of the dust cloud rollout. What happened in each of these areas is acutely interesting and relevant to an investigation of what destroyed the World Trade Center. And as the series progresses, I will add more data points and create a fuller understanding of the areas affected. What I've done here is simply put in an arrow showing that the dust cloud rolled all the way up to, but not into, Rockefeller Park. I plan to add more data to this map as we go along. We know the dust cloud rollout went at least as far as this interesting blue and white building, so I'm adding one more data point to the map so you can start to understand what I am approaching. What I hope to get is a large area of effect map of all the different effects seen. Speaking of adding data, remember our thought experiment with the concrete where we ignored the steel? Well, in real life, you can't ignore the steel. You have to account for what happened to the steel. The answer to this question is the most interesting and important discovery I've made in my scientific career. The steel also became dust. That dust cloud rollout that I referred to as being concrete, well, it was concrete, and it was glass, and it was also steel and everything else that was inside those buildings. You'll have to be patient with me as I go through all of the details supporting my assertion that the steel became dust. But one of the most obvious ways to look at this is that on the morning of 9/11, you started out with gigantic buildings made largely of steel, and you ended up with a dust cloud. Think of it as a before and after picture. Anyway, I'm running out of time for this episode, and so I will have to conclude here. In the next episode of 9/11 TruthCraft, I'm going to continue to tackle this concept of a map of the areas affected and how it might lead to a better understanding of what happened to the World Trade Center. And since at this time of making this video, I have about 12 subscribers, it really will make a difference to me if you become a subscriber or if you make comments about the videos and like them if you find them especially interesting. I'm also sincerely asking for donations to scientistpolitician@yahoo.com on PayPal, because buying the equipment and software that it takes to make decent videos isn't free, and forensic research isn't free either. Okay, stay tuned for even more of the good stuff. Oh my God, The testificates have overpopulated this area. So I'm going to have to do something about that, I think. Interesting.